Guys, what's your favorite punctuation mark?
Punctuation, that's a good one. They're all pretty good.
I like a healthy blend. It's sort of like asking about favorite children or favorite books. I might like a good dash.
Do you have a preferred like M dash, N dash?
I don't really like N dashes. Because I actually was trained first in AP style, which doesn't stick them in. And so I lived an N dash free life for a long time. I use them, but somewhat reluctantly. So I like M dashes for the snappy drama they can add to a sentence.
I agree. Yes, it is snappy drama. That is like a perfect way to put it.
I have a punctuation poem about them. Do you want to hear it? It's really quick.
More than anything, yes.
Okay. A dash is for panache. A hyphen is more trifling. That's it.
Beautiful.
Welcome to Butter No Parsnips. Every week on Butter No Parsnips, your hosts Emily Moyers and Kyle Imperatore take you on an adventure through the weird, wacky, wonderful, and sometimes even wicked world of one wayside word. Strange characters, delightful bits, and general joyousness abound. Join them as they test each other's etymological expertise.
Hey everybody, welcome to Butter No Parsnips. I'm Emily Moyers.
And I'm Kyle Imperatore.
Kyle, do you have your school uniform on?
Well, I went to an underfunded public school, so no. This is my sweater.
Equally perfect. Get your shiv fashioned from a ruler ready, because we're going back to primary school with this episode.
Oh?
Yeah, because your word today, Kyle, is grammar.
Oh, okay. Grammar. Okay. Okay, so grammar is, a language construct from which we derive rules for speaking. I don't know. That's the best I got.
That's not bad. That's not bad. But you know what, Kyle?
What? What's that?
I think maybe we should get a professional on to help us out with this one. It's a little tough. So good news, I have one. I have one here.
Oh, so you just wanted to make me look like a fool. Is that it, Emily?
You got it. Always, Kyle.
It's not
so
new.
Without further ado, say hello to the woman behind the Traveling Grammar Table, author of Rebel with a Clause, Tips and Tales from a Roving Grammarian, and general grammar connoisseur, Ellen Jovin.
Hello there. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Kyle.
Ellen, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to introduce yourself better than I just did?
Well, as you said, I have a traveling grammar table, but that I find is confusing to a lot of people when I meet them at parties. So I will explain further. In 2018, I thought it would be a good idea to just set up on the street and answer the grammar and language questions of passersby. So I got a folding table, put a sign on it that said grammar table, and walked outside my building and put it down on the streets. And people started coming up to me literally within less than a minute to ask questions about their language use. And I've been doing it ever since. I also have a company called Syntaxis, which is a communication skills training firm. I teach writing classes at businesses and other organizations. I have this company with my husband, and he trains people in oral communications, presentation skills, and things like that. So my entire life is built around the world of words, and I love it.
It's so exciting. We love it too. And we're so glad to have you here with us today. So, okay, how did I do with my definition? Was it even close? Is there a definition for grammar?
Well, there are different definitions for grammar. People argue about what it is a lot. And some of the most aggressive discussions I've been involved with on Twitter ever have concerned the definition of grammar, partly for that reason and partly because I don't really care that much what people ask me about. I try to shy away from that discussion. I mean, when people think of grammar from school, they think of the system of rules that they were taught they should use in writing and speech to sound like an educated person. From a linguistic point of view, it's more language use, how languages are put together, and the system of language. So I think we should focus more on the actual person on the street interest in language, because that's really what I'm about. And I suppose if I were really more precise at the grammar table, my sign would say something like, the grammar spelling, punctuation, literature, writing, and and composition table. It's really anything that people want to ask about. I mean, I even get asked about completely off-topic things. For example, like my religious faith and how to get stains out of carpets. So anything that people want to ask me about relating to language is fair game for me.
Yeah, I guess you just sort of exude authority. People think she probably has the answer to any question I have.
That's an interesting comment, though. I don't know that I would trust a random person on the street. So,
Ellen, what brought you to this passion for grammar and spelling and pronunciation and all those other things? What made it your life's pursuit?
I think I should just say pronunciation's pretty low on the list of things for me. I get into discussions with my husband a lot about pronunciation because my California vowels are very different from his Connecticut vowels. And I have to say that where we depart from the dictionary, I'm usually the one who's departing more often. So I've confused some East Coasters with my California vowels. I don't know. I think it's partly, just as with many things in life, I think it's partly a genetic thing. I just remember always loving language. My early memories often involved language experiences. My family is kind of scattered around the globe, so there are multiple native speakers of different languages in my pretty immediate family. So I grew up hearing people I was related to speaking other languages, and that automatically, I think, is kind of world opening linguistically. Yeah. But I also just always loved grammar in school. In my 8th grade class, we did the old fashioned sentence diagramming that people love to disparage now. But I loved it so incredibly much. I kind of feel like that was a moment for me where it really cemented into my brain as something that I loved.
And if anyone doesn't know what sentence diagramming is, Ellen has some wonderful videos on the subject. And I know what they are because of you. So
okay. Thank you. It was a good time. It's considered kind of outdated now, but I felt there was an artistry to it that I don't think people always value. Although, it's funny, anyone who's listening who actually did this in school, I think there's a good chance you'll identify with my memory of starting a sentence diagram on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and miscalculating how much room I needed for the prepositional phrases, and they would go off the edge, so I'd have to erase and start over. I really liked my assignments to look neat. It was really trying for me. The challenge with those things is to map them ahead in your brain.
Or we need longer paper. I think that's what we're coming to the conclusion.
I think turning it sideways would have helped a lot. That wasn't an option that was offered to us, I don't think. Wow, you should have come by as a consultant.
I should have. I'm sorry. It's my fault. So, Ellen, how did the idea for the grammar table come to life?
I had another language project, what I would call a recreational language project before this one, that was called Words and Worlds of New York, where I serially studied different languages spoken by New Yorkers. New York has 800 or so documented languages, and I feel very privileged to live in the middle of it and hear so many languages. And when I was maybe around, I guess it's 15 years ago now, I started this project where I would just study a language for 2 to 3 months, as much as I could fit in my free time, and I would blog about it, review language learning products. And it was really great. I loved it. I would go to neighborhoods I'd never been to and try languages. But a lot of that work, I ended up online so much. I was in all these Facebook language groups. I was blogging. So that's a lot of, writing by yourself at home. And I was spending so much time on the computer writing about grammar instead of actually talking to human beings that it really felt like I was losing one of the key things that language is important to me for, which is connecting to other human beings, hence the grammar table. So I basically took whatever I was doing online out to the street.
I feel like the human element of it does really come through. A practice I've noticed you take with visitors is they come to you with a grammar question and you'll ask them sort of personal follow-ups like, did this come up recently or do you get corrected on this often? I'm curious what your theory is behind asking those kind of personal follow-ups.
Well, that always happens very spontaneously. So I have no system. I have no system for anything. I have no system for when I post the Twitter or X. I post polls on X all the time about language. I ask questions spontaneously when people ask me something, just because it occurs to me that maybe there's a reason. For example, if a harried man in a suit comes up to me and wants to know about which versus that, there's often a good chance that he's a lawyer. I've had a very high success rate predicting whether the person asked me a question is a lawyer. And so I sometimes just am trying to figure out what their context is, because the answer also, first of all, I'm curious. I mean, it's just interesting to know why they might be distressed about a particular problem or curious about it. But also, I'm just interested in knowing where it is, especially if it's something that I think is just a superstition that they don't need to worry about. I like to know where the trauma is coming from.
You talk briefly about it in the book, but it does feel personal in a way when people are offended by like a missing apostrophe, or when they protest an absent Oxford comma. In a few instances, you name folks who wouldn't even seek a partner in someone who used the wrong "your," it's a big step. Where do you think those more visceral attachments to grammar come from?
Our language use is so personal and it's so deep. Probably all of us have these memories of something awkward happening, but also there are all these things that we don't remember that probably happened when we were tiny, and that you accumulate and contribute to the kind of person we are now and what our relationship to language is.
I feel like there's a sort of, I don't know, could it be partly instilled in us in school? Is school a problem for us and not helpful with grammar?
Well, I don't want to overstate it, because I use trauma a little bit loosely there.
Sure.
Some people actually really are incredibly anxious about their language use, and often that happens with people who there may be a gap between their own use of language and what is considered to be the standard language use. So they may feel that they're constantly making mistakes, that they're being judged for. And that can be exacerbated based on work environment or the kind of school they go to. Or, it can be something that seems little to a grown-up could be big for a kid. Like you have a test, you mess up on it and the teacher calls you out. Like things like that sometimes stain us in unexpected ways. But I know that a lot of people feel often insecure about how either they didn't get enough grammar training, that's what they feel like, or they feel they've forgotten too much. The latter thing is interesting to me in part because I don't think you have to go around knowing whether a word is an adverb or an adjective, or have some rigid rule about whether to use an Oxford comma, which, just in case anyone listening doesn't know, is the comma before the and in a list, toward the end of a list. But a lot of times the teasing around language use, it's not always negative. I think it's part of what forms our human communities. Like you go away to college, and some of the students say a word one way and others say it a different way. And yes, there's teasing, but it's often really good natured, and it's part of the bonding and the negotiation. I feel like we haggle over language. We haggle across generations about what works and what doesn't. And sometimes feelings are hurt, and there are the grammar police online who will pick on every little mistake. And I think people who do that really, I think they're trying to get some kind of rise out of it. I think sometimes it's not serving any useful purpose in the discussion, in the arguments that we have about a million other things, like some huge issue. And then the person's like, but you spelled your wrong.
Yeah.
So your book, Rebel with a Clause, it's fantastic because it sort of is like halfway between a memoir and a textbook. You meet all manner of people with all manner of grammar quandaries seeking help from your table, and you kind of organize those quandaries into chapters of the book, and it just humanizes these grammatical hangups in this way that we've been talking about, how like people have these really personal attachments to the way that they speak. And I'm wondering if that was kind of your intention going into the book, to use real life people to demonstrate real life grammar and make those ideas more accessible to passersby and readers off the street, things like that.
That's a great question. And if I were completely organized about how I do these things, I would say yes. But in fact, when I started doing the grammar table, it was totally just for fun. So I just walked out the door, started doing it. And what's kind of weird about it is that I had written a book about grammar before, just like a guide to grammar, not a piece of narrative nonfiction. And I had an agent who wanted me to write another grammar book. And I hadn't really picked the angle that I wanted for it was, so when I started doing the grammar table, I didn't think, oh, this would be a great angle for a grammar book. I literally went out and started doing it. It was totally fun. And I kept doing it because it was fun. And pretty soon, a couple of people said to me, hey, you should do a book about this. And then I thought, and then I kept doing it some more. And then I had a discussion with my agent about it. And then I wrote a proposal. And by the time I wrote the proposal for the book, it was definitely, I'm going to go all over the country. I want to go all over the country, talk to people everywhere about, their relationship to language. And it was pretty clear that those stories would be part of it. That was in the proposal, some of the encounters, because they're wacky. Like, people say things I just I don't expect. Kids come up to me, seniors come up to me, people tell me stuff about their marriages. I hear a lot of things, and it is human. For me, I guess that's why grammar is so interesting, because it's part of everything that we're doing right now. Our conversation, the conversation I'm going to have with my husband when I go home. It's not a dead thing. It's not a textbook. It's living throughout our lives. And to me, that is just absolute magic.
It is magic. The whole reason that we have language and grammar is to have this human-to-human connection. So the fact that you're kind of bringing it back to its roots is magnificent. It's wonderful.
I feel like it's therapy for me, because every time I go out there, I have so much fun. I've done it, hundreds of times. And I've been going out lately again. It's spring. It's nice in New York. And I just sit there. I leave. I'm out there for maybe a couple of hours and I go home and I'm in such a good mood.
There's something definitely electric about that. It's kind of improvised, we all of a sudden have a connection, and it is very New York. I think you could add therapy to your sign if you're gonna do all the long. I think it's therapy for the others as well.
I go to schools now too. That's a new thing that I've been trying to do more of. And I'll set up at very multilingual school out in Queens, and I brought some quiz questions that I put on the grammar table that the kids could try. And some of them were about English, but some of them were about other languages. And while I was there, I was able to get a few of the kids to write me additional quiz questions in their native languages that I didn't know. So it was like a little card that said, identify the language, and then they'd write a sentence. And then their classmates who came by later could try to identify that language and learn, thereby learning more about the multilingual character of the school. Like I couldn't have written one about Tibetan. This girl wrote something in Tibetan, and then that was on the table too. So it's like this community collaboration.
So when you're speaking to people on the grammar table, you refer a lot to like, this is what convention states. And sometimes it feels like that's a sort of diplomatic way to say you're wrong. But other times you seem sort of resentful of the convention.
There are a couple of different concepts for me of what the conventions are. So there are the conventions that I like to think exist based on a pretty broad spectrum of literature, writing, and dialect samples. So I embrace variety. I accept that within American English, we have certain conventions, and I mostly follow them when I'm writing, especially because I don't really feel like getting, I don't want to distract from my point because people are hung up on the form that I used of a particular word. But I also think there's a popular misconception of what the actual conventions are. Like, people have half remembered things from school. Like, they might have been taught a principle that they sort of remember, but they forgot the exception. Let me give you an example with Associated Press style. The Associated Press, the organization, the Associated Press, has a style guide that's used by a lot of newspaper people. It has commentary on the Oxford comma, so the comma before the and in a series. And the general principle with Associated Press style is that you don't use it. But then there's also commentary on how, if it's needed for clarity, you can keep it. And a lot of people who follow AP style forget that. I had, when I submitted a piece to a well-known newspaper, I wrote it without Oxford commas mostly because I knew what the convention of the paper was, but I stuck one in where it was necessary for clarity. They took it out, and I had to battle to get it back in. And I prevailed, but it was not easy. So I think that, partially remembered truths do not constitute convention, or
Sure.
grammar superstitions that have been debunked. Like I was encouraged, I don't remember exactly how strictly this was presented to me, but I was encouraged not to end sentences with prepositions, definitely encouraged not to split infinitives. Those things, how people teach those things, that's softened now based on a better understanding of actual language use, like what people actually do, what English is capable of. It isn't Latin grammar, so we don't need to avoid doing things that we avoided doing in Latin, that kind of thing. So I feel like I am resentful when I feel hemmed in by conventions that I don't believe are real ones. For example, another example is I like to stick S on towards and things like that. Like I like my S's. And British English often uses them, I guess. I mean, I haven't really even studied this extensively because it's so uninteresting to me. Both of them are out there. They're both out there, and yet American copy editors often slice off the S's. I want my S's. I just like the little slide into the next word. I want to keep that. Maybe I'm also looking for cover because I don't want to be the heavy all the time. So you're like, oh, the grammar table says that you should not do that. I can say, well, the convention is. I can't really, I can't really be sure about all the situations where I might have said that, honestly.
No, I mean, I agree. It's funny. There's times where I'm writing, I'm trying to think of specific words, but like sometimes there are words that have double L's in American English, but only one L in British English. And whatever word processor I'm using is always trying to correct me. Are you using British English? And I'm like, no, I just like to spell it this way. Leave me alone.
Yeah, I think it's usually the reverse. Traveled, usually in American English is one, traveled in British English more often too. Right. I don't care. And that's something that, I always do one on that because I'm not committed to it. But here's another example. People, so many Americans think you cannot begin a sentence with because. I'm not going to avoid that to satisfy a completely groundless superstition. I'm not going to limit my writing. Right. Now, I have an advantage in that typically people are going to think that if I did it, it's probably in a book about grammar, that is probably okay. So how can I give them, what good does my permission do for someone who takes my writing class if their boss thinks that you can never begin with because? Well, I offer my email address to those people and I say if anyone gives them a hard time, they can come to me and I will support them.
That is very kind of you. Another thing to add to the extended title.
I'm very passionate about that, though, because how can anyone argue that it's better to say, instead of, because it was raining, I brought my umbrella, perfectly normal sentence. How can anyone argue that that's ungrammatical and then say that what's grammatical is to say, due to the fact that it was raining?
Yeah.
I mean, it just makes no sense. And that kind of stuff makes me a little bit crazy. I have lots of examples like that.
Well, because we're on the subject, I want to open things up a little bit more and talk more about prescriptivism versus descriptivism. And our listeners who are interested in words, they might know about these terms from, how certain dictionaries choose new words to include every year. So could you break those terms down for us and how do they relate to grammar?
This is another area that generates a lot of very testy fights. And I think the terms are oversimplified and used carelessly in discussions. I tend to stay away from them for that reason, but just generally, what linguists engage in is often descriptive grammar. They're describing how a language is used. So if I walk down the street saying Harry gave the book to Sue and myself, a prescriptive grammarian might object to that, and say, oh no, that myself is wrong. A descriptive grammarian would say, okay, this is how it's being done here. Here's a data point, and a bucket of data points about a population's use of language. So it's not incorrect or correct. It's a way that people take sounds or written symbols and convey meaning. And that's not a professional linguist point of view. This is, as I said, something I try to stay away from. Now, where I would get categorized which I just think is so unfair. So sometimes people will see, I actually don't feel very put upon, but it has happened to me that people will say, oh, like someone with a grammar table, obviously she's a prescriptivist. She's going around telling people that they're wrong and that they should use language a particular way that conforms to what is often described as the standard grammar of a language. So, the language of professional life. It's not like there's a single universally consistent agreement about what constitutes that, by the way. But this idea that there's a right way to use grammar and a wrong way to use grammar, apparently, according to a few people who have written angry notes to me, talking about the F word constitutes bad grammar. So, because that's naughty. Not good language use. But anyway, but a linguist, for example, writing about studying language use in a certain population, maybe focusing on pronouns or something, they're going to be undertaking, it's a descriptive project. Here's how the population uses this stuff. But then if the linguist goes and writes a formal paper for publication, that's probably going to be written in language that conforms to what a prescriptive grammarian would be looking for, language that is the language of professional life. You wouldn't say, I would have ran. You say, I would have run, like that kind of thing. People sometimes talk about these things as though they're, cultural crises, but we all move easily back and forth between one and the other all the time. So that's a little bit oversimplified, but that's kind of how I perceive it. I prefer to leave definition arguments to other people because I don't find them very enjoyable, And even it's funny, even the term like clause, which for me had a very clear meaning in traditional grammar, the traditional grammar I was raised with, you have a subject and a verb. That makes a group of words with a subject and a verb, that's a clause. It's not used consistently in linguistics that way. So I try to stay away from some of these categorization discussions because often if you're using terms differently, you're not going to come to an agreement. So my goal is to get into the mud and the sticks of the language use, the actual applications, and then we can argue over the patterns just in the details rather than the bigger theory of it.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this with a couple other guests on our podcast, but it seems like really the ultimate goal of language is to be understood. And like any of these rules are just there, rules in quotes, are just there to help serve your ability to be understood.
So yes, the goal is to be understood. However, I'm interested in the art of writing and the art of communication. So I think sometimes when people say things like, well, okay, so I used the wrong verb form and I didn't punctuate it right, but you understood what I meant. That's kind of nonsense to me because that's a selfish communication philosophy. If I'm reading your writing and it's hard for me to know what you meant and I have to send you emails back and forth to try to sort it out, you haven't done your job as a writer to reduce the cognitive burden on me. So my job as a writer is it's like, and a speaker too, but I'm more of a writing focused person. My job is like that of a host. When I write something, I want it to be easy for the person. I want it to be comfortable. I want it to be not like I'm making you scrub the sink. I'm inviting you into my writing house and letting you sit on the sofa and I'm giving you a drink so you're comfortable. So when people say stuff like that to me, I feel like there's to communicate meaning, but there are also some people do that better than others. And then on top of that, there's a whole layer for me where grammar can get you into an exalted artistic universe that you don't need to know the grammar terms to understand it, but you can really, if you really are language sensitive, you can appreciate these very complex structures that skilled writers are using and what they're doing and how they hit you, right in the chest at the right moment with that sentence because they're controlling the structure. And I think that is a very beautiful thing and that people should appreciate that. And going back to your point about the detail with the your thing, sometimes people are just bad spellers. There's something processing wise that they can't quite remember which your it is. That's one thing. Sometimes, and I feel this is an area that is really unexamined, there is a correlation between that and not reading and not writing. like highly literate people are less likely to do that. So if you are a person who wants to date someone who cares about literature, you're probably going to notice that. And you're and you don't have a your problem. You're going to notice that. And I don't think that means the person is a terrible person for hoping that in the online dating world, that the message that comes in is artistic and grammatically, conforms to standard English if that's what they want.
I like you had some very descriptive, not in a descriptivism way, moments there when you were describing kind of the imagery of how you take control of language. And I think that is important to a lot of people who care about grammar. And you talk in Rebel with a Clause that your preference is for logical punctuation. Does that play into what we're talking about here?
Logical punctuation, that term, first of all, I don't know how broadly it's used, but I've encountered it.
We are going to make it broad if you want it to be broad, or it's going to take off.
I actually am not the logical punctuation user. I'm a logical punctuation fan, but I don't feel free to use it. So let me explain where I have encountered that term in my life. I've encountered it to refer to the placement of periods and commas around quotation marks. So when you get to the end of a quote that coincides with the need for a period or comma, do you put the comma inside or outside? Do you put the period inside or outside? Now, typically in British English, which is not, I don't live there, so I'm not following that, but British English typically follows logical punctuation. So let's say you have a sentence with a tiny quote at the end, not a full sentence. It's not one of these he says, comma, and then a full sentence. It's something like, Reggie describes his boss's management style as one of, quote, persnickety pomposity. So I'm going to have that in quotes, the two-word phrase in quotes. Yeah. Now, in American English, we put the period inside. In British English, the period would go outside. That's logical punctuation because the quoted piece is just the words. It feels like the period belongs to my sentence. It should go outside. I would actually be very happy if that were our system, but it's not. I live in New York, so I just shove it right inside. I'm focusing on those because it's only about those two. It's not about things like question marks and exclamation marks, which go inside, outside logically. It's these two that we just tuck in. And I don't love it because I've spent so many people hours trying to explain to students in my class these rules. So obviously they're not really hitting people's brains as logical. I'm fighting against the tide. And I have to say, stop thinking, which I don't like to say. Like, turn off your brain, just shove those two things inside and let's move on. No, they want to discuss the why. And so, that's a problem, I think.
Yeah, it's fair. I sort of reached a point where I decided to abandon the why, and I will always put the punctuation inside the quotes just because it looks cleaner. Because if you put the quotes first, then it looks like your period is like hanging really far away from the sentence, and I don't like that. Just
Emily and I do not agree on this. I just want to say.
You like it outside?
I like it outside.
Yeah. Okay. I support you. If I could enact a reform, I probably, just to be responsible, I need to do a little fuller survey. Although I feel I've talked to enough people this discussion has probably included thousands of people over the course of my teaching and grammar tabling life. But I'd probably want to speak to the typographical experts a little bit about this before I did anything reckless. But this is on the top of my list of things that seem to annoy people that I can't really give them a good explanation for.
Well, you brought up taking a larger survey, and that perfectly segues into asking about your Twitter polls or X polls. You do take to the internet a lot with polls about certain grammar questions. And these are, if I'm understanding right, these are questions that like people have asked you in real time sometimes, or is it just pure research?
So if I were going to do responsible research, I probably wouldn't rely on X, Twitter, because... Fair. It's a little random out there.
That's a polite way of putting it.
No, I have bursts of Twitter polls, like they get really plentiful when I am editing something I've written. So I'll be going through some nooks and crannies of a chapter or something. And it just keeps popping into my head. I want to ask people what they think about things because I might be wavering about what I want to do. So how do people feel about this word form? How do they feel about this piece of punctuation? But the polls I post on Twitter, which I love, by the way, I love doing that. Those ideas come to me from every direction. So I might be walking down the street in New York and I overhear a snippet of conversation where someone says something that surprises me, that's different from the way I would say it, that becomes a poll. Someone sends me a text about something that they noticed, that becomes a poll. Someone emails me, same thing. And I actually feel like it just is sort of raining down on me because I have Ellen Jovin accounts and Grammar Table accounts on most of the major platforms, and I get DMs through all these different things. And some of them are interesting to me. Occasionally someone will ask me to do a poll, and I will do it if I feel it's interesting or appropriate, which I don't always. But more often, it's someone will ask me about something either on the actual platform or through DM, and I say, "Oh, that's so interesting. Let's put that out there." Oh, and also I get a lot of them from newspapers when I'm reading the news or magazines like the New Yorker. I'll see something, so it's endless. It's like if I have words coming into my eyeballs, they'll end up in a Twitter poll.
Do you find that the responses are like unanimous? Are people like on the right side when they're responding? I'm sure some of them are just preference.
Yeah, a lot of the polls I post, because I'm often interested in kind of those like edge situations where it's not clearly resolved. I don't post that many things unless I see a really common error that I find kind of interesting. A lot of the things I'm posting about are kind of gray area. Like, do you use this word in this way? Not technically grammar, but as I said before, I don't feel like I personally have to limit myself. Occasionally I'll tweet something and someone will write, that's not grammar. And I'm like, okay, sorry. I didn't know that there was a fence around me. So often they're gray areas where, I might post questions. I often post questions about dialect varieties too. So that's why I love Twitter for that reason, because I can get Australian English, Singaporean English, Indian English, different dialects from the UK. I can get Irish English and whatever else Canadian English. I'm sorry to any Englishes I've forgotten. There's so many. And that's to me very interesting because they're walking down the street in New York. I hear a lot of New York English and a lot of international English, but I don't hear a big enough sample size from other countries. So it's been one of the most wonderful ways to get input about practices and habits and how things are perceived. And, I'm not talking about just stuff like, oh, do you spell do you do IZE or ISE? It's more, it's subtler things. And the answers they're often what I expect, but they're very rarely they're not unanimous. They often, people have opinions. And when it's gray area, I really just, I don't try to force something. I'm not saying, oh, you're wrong, you should do it this way. Yeah. That's not the point of the poll. I am kind of interested in how people mispunctuate appositives, like they'll do things and a positive related things, like, and by that I mean, so if I have a sentence like our CEO, comma, Emily Roberts, comma, oh, Emily, I just happened to pick your name. Sorry, that was totally unintended. Our CEO,
I'm in the story.
Make that less weird. Our CEO, comma, and Roberts, comma, will be speaking at 5. Okay, so that's an appositive. You put commas there. But people also put commas in CEO, comma, and Roberts, comma, will be speaking at 5. So I do polls about that kind of punctuation. That second one, no commas. And I will actually comment, no, it's wrong. Because, yes, I mean, if a lot of people punctuate it with commas, maybe eventually it'll become right. At the moment, that's not the standard. Any editor, you're keeping a copy editor in business if you put those commas in, and it just doesn't, I just wouldn't recommend it to anyone. So I do try to follow up on those and say the correct answers where there are some.
Sure. So we're starting to wind to the end of our time, but I feel like we got to talk about the documentary. You are working on one, if I'm not mistaken. Is this basically a live action version of the book? Is it taking a different direction? Can you speak about that?
The Grammar Table documentary is the project of my husband, Brant Johnson. So it's his artistry has produced a full-length documentary that he is now submitting to film festivals. So we hope it will be available to an audience at some point through whatever means that is. There are lots of ways now in this modern world to get these things done.
Yeah,
many of them very tricky. But anyway, he and I traveled together all over the country with the grammar table. I wrote a book about it. He filmed. I actually wrote a book only about the book I wrote when we had only been to 47 states because we had 3 left when COVID cut us off. So I was planning to go to all 50 and then write the book, but I had to write the book about 47. And I was housebound for a while here in New York when COVID was at its peak and I was writing. We went to the remaining 3 in 2022. The movie, he shot everywhere we went. He had cameras attached to the car windshield, to the table, behind the table. So he filmed all the action. And I can confidently say it is the greatest grammar road trip movie ever made.
I could not be more excited by that tagline.
If someone gave me a list of movies and just the synopses and that was on there, I'd say, yep, that is the one I'm going for.
100%.
Well, thank you. I hope other people feel that way too. It's very painful for me to look at myself in footage. However, despite that, it really makes me laugh. People all over the country were filmed, including the side of a mountain in Alaska and a beach on Oahu. So it's just, I love the landscape variety. I love the linguistic variety. Like especially some of the scenes in the South, I really enjoyed. The dialect differences were more pronounced there. People thought I sounded weird. Some of those conversations really cracked me up.
This sounds so exciting. It's an extension of that conversation about humanity. We get to see humanity across the United States. It's really wonderful.
For me, this is very much about valuing both the individual and community. So I genuinely feel that I learn from meeting all kinds of people. The person in front of me is interesting to me. I'm not looking over that person's shoulder to see who the next person is behind them. I like to know what this person that came up to me to talk about language or whatever it is they're talking about. Who are they? What are they bringing to this that I don't know about it? What is their experience of words? And on top of it, I really am so interested in just the importance of community in supporting a healthy society, the foundations of democracy. Social media has been great for me. I have a very determined focus on social media. I have a language question for you, and I'm interested in seeing what you're going to say to it. But I think that the being outside talking to people is so important. And I noticed as we traveled around the country that it was often in some communities, it's hard to find a place where people really gather. Sometimes that may have been because we just didn't know where to go. We're newcomers to an area, but often genuinely the urban design does not promote that kind of central meeting place where people can exchange ideas and not be as mean to each other as it's easy to be online. So that I think comes across in the movie a lot. And for that reason, it's very moving to me.
I think we're both very excited for this. It sounds very moving. Ellen, we have one last question for you, and this may or may not be related to that very moving message you just relayed to us. Is there something about grammar that you'd like our audience to take away from this episode? It could be something that's all-encompassing or just a simple rule. Is there anything that you want them to know?
I think, yes, immediately. So many people seem to feel bad that they don't remember what the different categories of conjunction are, what an interjection is, or what an adverb does. And I think it's not a good use of our life, the time we're allotted in this life to feel anxiety about deficiencies like that. For me, that stuff is fun. It doesn't have to be fun for everyone. I also think that too many people perceive grammar as to be about this oppressive set of constraints that's binding them in their language use. They're afraid they're going to hit up against an error, so they avoid it, and they avoid a construction and they limit themselves. There's a little bit of a fear there. I like to present the idea of grammar as a set of possibilities rather than constraints. And the way I think adults, who are out of school and maybe don't want to open a standard grammar textbook at this point, the way people can become more immersed in the world, the variety and the beauty of what all these grammatical possibilities affords is to read and to read widely. I don't care if it's fiction or nonfiction, but just that's one of the most wonderful ways to experience the possibilities of really beautiful language. And I mean, sometimes when I read a book and the writing is gorgeous, I just feel like my soul is singing.
Yeah, you're talking to a couple librarians, so we support that 100%.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Librarians are my people.
Us too.
This is the perfect meetup then.
Yes, okay. Grammarians are our people, so.
Yeah.
Ellen, this is normally the part in the episode where we might bring a game to you, but we hear that you have brought a surprise for us.
Oh, yes. So I'm on this whole grammar bee jag. I've been doing grammar bees at schools, conferences. I can imagine doing it at a corporate event. Just putting that out there. But grammar bees are like spelling bees, except with grammar, so even more fun. So in fact, next week I'm going to be doing a grammar bee. So I brought a few questions that might, you could, for example, find in a grammar bee run by me. Mm-hmm. I do different kinds of grammar bees. Some are more theoretical, and use the terms because maybe teachers want the kids to know them. It's part of what they're doing in school. Sometimes it's more applied grammar, like, is this comma in the right place? That kind of thing. So I brought a few questions for you.
I'm so excited.
Yeah,
I'm alive right now.
I'm thrilled. Awesome.
Okay. So question number one. How many adverbs are there in the sentence, the shockingly lively lizard locked eyes with me?
Can I answer?
Yes. Do you want me to repeat it?
No, I think I got it.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there's one. Because I think lively, even though it ends in an ly, is an adjective there.
Yeah.
Very nice. And this is why I say that librarians are my people. Yes. And so actually that phrase right there, the shockingly lively lizard. So there's some adjectives in English like lively, lovely, friendly. They end in an ly and then people think, oh, it must be an adverb. No, see, you did not fall for that. And I commend you for that. You get an A+ for this first question. But I like being able to go through a sentence and just know what each piece is, So like the shockingly lively lizard, you have the article the, you have shockingly, the adverb, which modifies lively, which is the adjective, which in turn modifies lizard, which is the noun. To me, that seems like so much fun to figure out. It's not clear to me why it's so much not fun for other people. However, I hope to overcome that that reluctance, with people who are ready for it. Yes, with questions like this. Okay.
Well, I think if we have fun with it, then the fun is contagious. So.
Okay. Yes. So number 2. I feel like you're just going to get, this is going to be so easy for you.
I'll leave this one to Kyle.
I got to buzz in.
Oh, lucky. I'm sure Kyle, are you delighted to hear that?
Well, yes, of course.
Okay. Number 2 is a fill in the blank question. The podcaster emailed Rachel, Sue, and blank about the coming electrical storm. And in that blank, your choices are me, myself, and I. The podcaster emailed Rachel, Sue, and blank about the coming electrical storm.
I struggle with this. I'm not going to lie.
This is the only question I got wrong on my English Regents, and the rule has been cemented in my brain ever since.
Okay, so Kyle, what do you say?
My logic is, because if you cut out those other names, you would say emailed me. So I think me is the word that fits in there.
Yes, and I like this question because it's an example of how weird grammar prejudices get in our heads. Like often people seem to have acquired this general bad feeling about me because they know they're not supposed to in formal standard English to say me and Joe went to the movies. They know it should be Joe and I went to the movies. But then they apply it everywhere. I'm trying to restore dignity to the humble, hardworking pronoun form me.
Yeah.
Good work. All right. And
We're
now
thankful.
this last one
Yeah.
is of a category that has been extraordinarily unpopular with people. But I'm bringing it to you.
Divisive. Love it.
This is one. So I was a mathlete in high school. I was the captain of my high school math team. I loved math. So I was an applied math major until my junior year of college, when I switched to German and started and gave in to this language lust that has since taken over my life. So I like math, but I guess I didn't love it enough. But I do like to combine it with grammar and word problems that people really seem to hate. But I'm trying to sort it out because I feel like there's something here. You know, I feel like this could be a thing. Okay.
Yeah. I like
so what is the cube of the number of letters in the part of speech that parsnips is?
I think I've successfully parsed out the linguistic element. Now I just have to do the math. I don't know if I can do
I
math
know.
that big.
It's the same. But the other one, so I had one and I was like, I don't think that's a number that's cubable. So that can't be right. But my math is not good. So
Am I allowed a calculator or do I have to do it in my head?
You're allowed a calculator. I'm not a strict proctor here.
256.
No.
Oh, it's the cube. Wait.
No. Oh, no.
We're doing
wait.
a cube.
Yes. No, I did it wrong. Shoot. It's 64.
Yes.
Yeah.
Emily, can you show your work here, please?
Yes, absolutely. So the part of speech that parsnips is a noun. And that has 4 letters. And 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. Somewhere along the way, I got lost into doing 8 times 8 times 8. And that's not even what 256 is. So I got
doing
double
square
confused.
roots. I was doing square roots, so I was on the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
All right. I think I probably don't have a future in these grammar math problems, but what I like about them is that I love that it's a word problem that's sort of tangled. Like it's like a mental agility quiz by just keeping track of the words. I don't know. I just think it's super fun, but the only group that I've ever found to be super happy about this problem or problems like this at the grammar table were engineering students at UPenn when I went there the other day. But I feel like for 8th graders, like maybe for 8th graders who've just had the math and just had the grammar, if they've, that it could be good.
I love it. I just want to say I'm all for it. I'm not good at it, but I love it.
Yeah. But I also would just like to say that I really loved the facial expressions while you were puzzling this out. Kyle, you were extra dramatic.
Thank you. It's my theater background.
Can't wait to watch
from
that
time to time.
Ellen, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about all this grammar and giving us that game. Before we wrap up, where can people find you and what do you got going on?
Well, they can find me at Grammar Table on a whole bunch of social media platforms. The ones I'm currently most active on are Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at my @Grammar Table account. You have to spell grammar correctly or you will not find it. So that's your first quiz right there. I'm happy for people to email me if they have particular questions, ellen@grammartable.com. I mean, if you want some nostalgic diagramming videos, I'm on YouTube. I have a Grammar Table account there too. Not a lot of videos, but I cover some good ground there. And then lastly, if you want to be notified about when the movie comes out, you can go to the website grammartable.com and there is a place for you to add your email. And I've never yet sent out a mailing, so you're unlikely to be deluged with spam, with grammar spam. You're probably safe with me.
Ellen, thank you again. This has been such a fun and fruitful conversation. We've really enjoyed it.
Thank
For our
you.
listeners at home, please remember that you can find Butter No Parsnips on social media as well, on Facebook and Instagram at Butter No Parsnips Podcast, and on TikTok at Butter No Parsnips. And if you like today's episode, consider giving us a 5-star rating or review wherever you heard us.
If you really like today's episode, consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/butternoparsnips. Donating $5 or more earns you a shout out either on social media or right here on the podcast.
Thanks so much to all of you. You help us make what we make.
And with that, I have been Emily Moyers.
And I've been Kyle Imperatore, and you've been
Ellen Jovin.
And this has been Butter No Parsnips.
Thank you for listening to Butter No Parsnips. Butter No Parsnips is produced by Seth Glicksman, Emily Moyers, and Kyle Imperatore. The theme music and additional music is by Kyle Imperatore.